Our story starts with a tale about a lone adventurer who ended up breaking all the taboos. We then see a scene of a man ferociously devouring a red minotaur, and in the next moment we notice that his arm was completely broken. However, after devouring the flesh of that minotaur, we see that his arm began to regenerate. The system then announced that the roar skill was acquired along with the battle axe skill. The man roared fiercely as a gigantic aura burst out of his body. Around him, many monsters were watching. It is then revealed in the diary of a certain noble that devouring monsters is considered a taboo in this world. For a human, eating monsters means absorbing their evil essence. The first symptom of this act is a frenzied feeling that cannot be explained with mere words, and it comes accompanied by catastrophic superhuman strength. The second symptom includes severe headaches and nausea, followed by poisoning. After all the creatures attacked the man, he ordered them to get out of his way immediately. Then it was explained that the third symptom was sudden death. The man was captured by the monsters, but with a fierce look in his eyes, he swore revenge on everyone. It was also mentioned that there was another possible outcome of devouring monsters, transforming into a monster oneself after consuming all their evil essence. We then see the man slaughtering monsters and devouring their flesh. While doing so, he gained new abilities: analysis, echolocation, and absorption. Soon after, a giant serpent appeared before him as he was eating the head of a wolf. By devouring the wolf, he gained increased agility and the lightning cloak skill. Activating this cloak, he electrocuted the giant serpent. After defeating it, he killed all the other monsters in front of him, acquiring the skills Poisonous Mist and Web Manipulation. However, after a long period of battle, he became extremely tired and thought that with this much power, he might finally survive. But just when he believed everything was fine, another horde of monsters appeared before him. Determined, he declared that he would definitely return alive. The scene then shifted to Bologna, a frontier city near multiple dungeons. Among them was one known as the Dungeon of Miasma. The air inside this dungeon continuously corrodes the condition of adventurers who enter it, which is why most adventurers hated the place. But our protagonist visited it often. Eventually, people began calling him the Butcher of the Miasma. He arrived before a field of miasma and said that it looked great, and that today would be a profitable day. He had reached the 6th floor of the dungeon. It was explained that the grasses growing within the miasma had the effect of purifying it, and also served as an irreplaceable source of income for him. He reminded himself not to take too much, only what he needed. After collecting, he said that the amount should last him 3 days. Suddenly, he noticed miasma rats nearby. It was explained that many of the monsters in this place used miasma and poison, which was another reason why adventurers disliked the dungeon. However, the protagonist said that such things had no effect on him. He then pushed through the toxic smoke and charged at the rats, killing one. But soon after, 2 more leapt at him, forcing him into a fight with the massive rats. Suddenly someone shouted fireball and flames struck the rats, saving him from being devoured. A group of 3 adventurers appeared beside him. One of them claimed he had missed his shot, while another scolded him for not getting closer before casting. The protagonist recognized their faces from the Adventurers Guild. One of the young men extended his hand, asking if his name was Rode, and mentioned that Rode seemed to be in a pretty rough situation, so he decided to help. Rode, however, did not take the hand. He stood up on his own, though he did thank the adventurer. Still, he pointed out that he would have appreciated a warning before having a fireball hurled at his face. The man replied that shouting fireball was the warning. The large man in the group then noted that the miasma grass colony was really there, and the adventurers remarked how lucky they were to have found it. Rudder, on the other hand, was impressed that they were actually following him to find his collection point. However, one of them insisted that they were just adventurers trying to make a living in a dungeon, and it was only by coincidence that they ran into him and ended up saving him. They then mocked Rude, saying, as expected of the Butcher of the Miasma, he can't even properly thank us. Those 3 adventurers were already prepared to fight Rude, but realizing that the situation was not in his favor, Rude reluctantly apologized and with great anger forced himself to thank them. The scene then shifted to Bologna, to Rude's base of operations, which was a restaurant called Full Belly. At that moment some men were harassing Rude, saying that whenever the butcher of the miasma entered the restaurant, the food would reek of a terrible stench. One of them added that they were only saying this because Rude was dumb enough not to have noticed it yet. They went on to say that adventurers are supposed to be people with the ability to defeat monsters. Someone like Rude, who only had the pathetic skill of abnormal status nullification, couldn't even be considered a real adventurer. It was then explained what abnormal status nullification was. It was a unique ability, useful in exploring a miasma dungeon, for example. Unfortunately, it wasn't suitable for fighting monsters, which is a vital requirement for adventurers, because he lacked a combat-oriented ability. Rude was not welcomed into any party. That was why he had gained the nickname Butcher of the Miasma, since he was always found in the lower floors of miasma dungeons, scavenging for items. In other words, thanks to his worthless skill, he had become nothing more than a rejected adventurer. Rude reflected bitterly, saying that he was already a grown man, yet he was still fighting life or death battles against filthy rats. Well, those rats weren't exactly normal. But still, later lying in bed depressed, he wondered if he was doomed to spend his entire life as a cursed butcher of the miasma. The scene shifted again to the Adventurers Guild. Rude thought that he needed to find another colony while he still had some money left. But then he noticed a crowd gathered and wondered what was happening since the place was far noisier than usual that day. He approached the receptionist and asked if there were any good requests available. Recognizing him as the butcher of the miasma, she informed him that a new dungeon had just been discovered. Hearing this made Rude very excited, because new dungeons were always filled with treasures and magical items, an incredible opportunity for any adventurer. He immediately understood why so many people were there that day. However, the receptionist had more to say. She mentioned the miasma herbs that he always brought in and told him that from now on their price had dropped significantly. Shocked, Rude desperately asked why they had done that. She explained that the miasma dungeon had never been popular to begin with, and now that everyone's attention was focused on the new dungeon, there would be no demand for the herbs anymore. This left Rude extremely frustrated. She then explained that the new dungeon was located in the Avaliel Mountains, but Rude was not allowed to go there. He demanded to know why, and she told him that the requirement to enter a new dungeon was rank D or higher. Unfortunately, poor Rude was only rank E, which meant he wasn't qualified to enter. This enraged him, and he said he wanted to at least take a look inside the new dungeon, asking if there was any way he could. But the receptionist insisted that rules were rules, and that even if he went he would only end up dying for nothing. Suddenly a blonde man appeared and asked Rude if he really wanted to go that badly. If so, he could join their group as a porter. The scene then shifted to a carriage, where Rude was already traveling with them. The blonde man said it was fortunate that they had found Rude, because they had been searching for someone to carry the materials from the new dungeon, but no one had been willing to help them. Hearing this, Rude stayed silent, thinking that it was probably because all the guild's adventurers were rushing to join the new dungeon expedition, making it difficult to find a porter. The other two members of the group complained, saying that out of everyone, they had to end up with the butcher of the miasma, and wondered if they couldn't have found someone better. The blonde man told them to stop, pointing out that Rude was actually a veteran adventurer. In fact, it was far better to bring someone like him than a complete novice. The blonde man then introduced himself again. His name was Bayer, and he was the leader of the Scarlet Blades. The other two were Sasha and Rick, all three being D-rank adventurers. The protagonist introduced himself as Rude, an adventurer from Hankier, and said it was a pleasure to work with them. Bayer then added that before they entered the dungeon there was something he wanted to know. Bayer asked Rude about his status and if he wouldn't mind showing his guild card. Rude then took out his guild card and handed it over. At that moment the system displayed Rude's status, showing that he was level 7 rank E, human and in normal condition. Not only that, but it also revealed all the abilities he possessed. Bayer was surprised to see that Rude could also use fire magic. Rude admitted that yes, he could, but the power was too low to be effective in battle. Still, it was useful for lighting dark places or for cooking. Bayer smiled and said that was quite handy, so they would be counting on Rude for this mission. They eventually arrived at the dungeon, and everyone was excited as they stood before the gate. The bear announced that this was the new Abelau dungeon. Sasha, thrilled, said it looked like they were the first ones to arrive. Rick was already eager, insisting that they start exploring as quickly as possible. They opened the gate, but to their surprise, the dungeon was already completely packed with people. Some were collecting miasma, others were fighting monsters, and still others were looting treasure chests. Outraged, Sasha shouted that the place was overcrowded with adventurers. Bear remarked that it seemed the first floor had already been thoroughly explored. Rick insisted they needed to push deeper since there would probably be fewer people below. Sasha agreed with him, but Rode objected, pointing out that since this dungeon had just been discovered, it would be wiser to first map the upper layer. Senton sneered, asking if Rode was seriously trying to give advice. Rick mocked him as well, saying that was exactly why Rode was still rank IA. Bayer stepped in, asking the two to stop tormenting Rude, since he hadn't meant any harm. However, Bayer admitted that he agreed with his companions, saying that if they stayed on the first floor they wouldn't get any decent results. They needed to go deeper. So the group descended to the fourth layer. Almost immediately, a wolf attacked. Rick shielded Rude and struck the wolf in the head, telling Rude to stop being afraid of such small fry. Meanwhile, Sasha electrocuted wolves with her magic, and Bayer cut them down effortlessly. Watching the scene, Rude thought to himself that they were all incredibly strong while he couldn't even move properly inside the dungeon. After some time, they managed to finish off all the wolves. Sasha remarked that, in the end, they had been right to advance further, and it was much better without other groups around. Bayer agreed, saying the monsters here weren't too strong, and they had even found some nice treasures. Rick then told Rude to collect materials from the monsters he had helped defeat. But Rude replied that he couldn't gather anything from them since their bodies were too damaged, and the magic stones were probably shattered as well. Rick mocked him, asking, "And what if they aren't? You're just too lazy, butcher of the miasma." Rude grew angry, but he had no choice, so he went to collect anyway. He stopped in front of a wolf's mangled corpse, its guts spilling out and the stench of blood filling the air. He wondered why the damn thing had to be cut up so badly. Activating his fire magic, he thought maybe it would be easier if he burned it a little. Rick noticed and asked if the old man was actually going to burn the monster, and joked if Rudd was planning to eat it. Then Rick admitted that he himself was getting hungry since they had been exploring for quite some time. He even started to think the monsters looked appetizing. Sasha scolded him, calling him disgusting and telling him to stop. She reminded him that it was taboo for adventurers to eat monsters, since consuming them meant absorbing their mana, and no one could predict what might happen to their bodies. Rick laughed it off, saying he was only joking, and that once they got back, he'd use the money they earned to eat something satisfying. But suddenly, they all felt a terrifying presence approaching. When they turned around, they saw a massive red minotaur wielding a huge axe. Rudd panicked, wondering why a rank B monster was appearing here in such a shallow layer. Sasha shouted that there was no way they could defeat it. The group trembled, uncertain of what to do. Bayer then turned to Rode and told him he would use his items, asking Rode to hand over his backpack. He also instructed Rode to pay close attention to the Minotaur's movements. Rode nervously asked if Bayer actually had a plan. With a sinister smile, Bayer replied that yes, he did. Then, without warning, he slashed Rode across the back with his sword, dropping him to the ground instantly. Bayer ordered Rick to activate his skill immediately. Rick obeyed, unleashing his warrior's encouragement, a skill that caused its target to draw. Rick's skill drew the attention of all the nearby monsters. He infused that ability into his axe and threw it next to Ruda. Immediately after, Sasha activated her acceleration skill, which doubled the target's speed. Realizing everything, Rude asked if they had planned to abandon him there from the very beginning. Badir, his expression completely different from before, asked if Rude had thought there was any other reason they brought the butcher of the miasma along. The group then fled, telling Rude to buy them as much time as possible. Enraged, Rude screamed, furious at their betrayal, but he had no time to dwell on it, as the Minotaur was already about to strike him. The monster's axe slammed into the ground and Rude laughed nervously, saying he had managed to dodge the attack, but he knew this was the end of the line for him. The Minotaur rammed him with its shoulder, smashing him against a wall. Yet at that moment the wall gave way, collapsing. On the other side was a massive pit, and both Rude and the Minotaur fell together. After crashing down from such a great height, Rude slowly opened his eyes, wondering if he was still alive. He realized he had survived only because he landed on top of the Minotaur's body. Though his arm was completely broken, he muttered that he didn't have much time left. Even if no more monsters appeared, he would die of blood loss or starvation before he had any chance to recover. At that moment he felt overwhelming hunger. He said he needed to eat something, anything, as soon as possible. His gaze fell on the Minotaur's corpse and he thought its flesh looked strangely delicious. Shocked at himself, he cursed, wondering what kind of idiocy he was thinking. Eating a monster could only bring disaster. Closing his eyes, he reflected on his miserable life. But then he remembered something. As a child, someone had once told him, "No matter how hard life becomes, never give up on living." With a bloodthirsty glare, Rib sank his teeth into the Minotaur's flesh. It was explained that if a human devoid of mana ate the flesh of a mana-rich monster, the monster's particles would invade their body. This state was called monstrification, a terrible fate, worse than death by poison. That was exactly why eating monsters was a taboo among adventurers. Still, to replenish the blood he had lost and satisfy his hunger, Rode took a gamble. That gamble led to an unexpected mutation. Even his broken arm regenerated. Rode then continued walking through the dungeon, bats watching him from the darkness, but his expression had changed. It was now more monstrous than human. The bats swooped down to attack, but Rud unleashed a new skill, Roar. His thunderous cry intimidated the enemies, knocking some unconscious while the others fled, almost like the Conqueror's haki from One Piece. Another new skill then activated, Physical Reinforcement, which temporarily boosted his strength. With the axe he had picked up earlier, he slaughtered the bats and devoured their flesh. From them he gained the ability Echolocation, which allowed him to detect creatures nearby, especially in the dark. Activating it, he sensed hordes of monsters approaching. With a twisted smile he growled, "Let's see who eats who this time." Rud rampaged, cutting down monsters and devouring them. Each time he ate one, he felt immense power surge through his body. After killing and consuming countless creatures, he finally emerged from the dungeon. Throwing his axe to the ground, he shouted at the sky, declaring he had survived. The scene shifted to the Adventurers Guild, where the atmosphere was heavy with tension. A man spoke, saying that after hearing the group's report, he had gathered all the adventurers who were inside the dungeon, except Rude, who had been with them. This man was Lancers, the guild master of Bologna. Bier, pretending to be grief-stricken, said that when they encountered the Minotaur on the 4th floor, Rud had been killed before they could protect him. He added that if only they had noticed the Minotaur sooner, they might have saved him. Sasha faked tears and Rick played along with the same act. Lancers nodded, saying he understood their situation. From now on, entry into that dungeon would be forbidden. But suddenly the sad receptionist looked up in shock. To her disbelief, the one who had just walked through the door was none other than Rude himself. It was Rude himself. Everyone was shocked to see the butcher of the miasma alive, wondering how he had survived. At that moment, Bier rushed forward to hug Rude, exclaiming how glad he was that Rude was alive. But as he embraced him, Bier whispered in Rude's ear that if he revealed anything he would kill him. The rest of the group greeted Rude as well, asking if he was all right, if he was injured, and claiming they had been worried. They insisted that they had even tried to return to save him, but the dungeon gate had already been sealed. With feigned sincerity, Bier declared that, whatever the case, Rude had survived and that deserved a celebration, but not here. However, as Baccaria looked closer, he noticed that Rude could barely move. Rude then spoke up, telling everyone present that they had used him as bait. The crowd grew uneasy at the accusation. Shocked, Baccaria asked what he was talking about. Lancers, the guildmaster, asked Rude to explain what he meant. Rude then revealed that Baccaria had stolen his supplies and attacked him from behind, that Rick had used his skill to redirect the Minotaur toward him, and that Sasha had accelerated the group so they could escape. Desperate, Barra denied everything, claiming none of that had happened. But Lancers calmly replied that they could clarify the truth with her. At that moment, a woman entered the guild hall, and everyone froze in fear. She was an officer of truth. Sasha asked, why an officer of truth, who almost never left the royal capital, was there? Lancers explained that due to the unusually high number of deaths among the porters in their party, he had called in an old favor to bring her here. He then asked the officer to determine who was telling the truth between Bayer's group and Rode. The woman declared that the members of Scarlet Blade were lying. Lancers raised his staff and confirmed that Rode was indeed telling the truth, leaving the adventurers in shock. Bayer lost control, shouting in disbelief, demanding how she could possibly know. Lancers explained that her ability was truth and it was impossible to acquire after reaching adulthood. Its effectiveness rivaled that of unique skills, and no lie could bypass it. What could be more reliable than the words of someone who had sworn to dedicate their power to the nation? Lancers then declared that abandoning companions was a grave taboo for adventurers. Worse still, Bagria's group had injured one of their own, using him as bait. Even without investigating their other crimes, this alone was enough to revoke their adventurer licenses, reducing them to slaves. Sasha and Rick panicked, insisting this couldn't be real. Barrett, enraged, cursed that someone like him could never become a slave, and if not for the officer of truth, no one would have discovered his plan. Consumed by rage, Bayer attacked her, but Rude immediately stepped in, shielding her and warning Bayer never to lay a finger on the officer of truth. He then punched Bayer squarely in the face, sending him flying across the guild hall. Everyone gasped in shock at Rude's overwhelming strength. The scene shifted to the visitors' chamber of the guild. Lancers apologized to Rude for troubling him, acknowledging he must be exhausted, but Rude reassured him that he was fine. Lancers explained that the three culprits had been captured by his men, and would now be interrogated. If it was confirmed that they were repeat offenders who had used porters as bait, the Scarlet Blade members would lose all possessions and qualifications as adventurers, becoming slaves. But since Badir had gone as far as trying to kill an officer of truth, it was likely he would never be seen again. Returning to the matter of rewards, Lancers said that the group had forfeited all profits they had made inside the dungeon. Instead, all of it would go to Rude. He informed him there were about 200,000 regen, and asked Rude to accept it. Rudd left the chamber with the money in hand, hugging it tightly with joy. He thought that this would cover a large part of his expenses, and that it would have taken him a long time to gather such an amount, even if he collected miasma every single day. To think that one could make so much money just by being an adventurer. It amazed him. He then realized that people had stopped insulting him, likely because they had witnessed what happened earlier, but that didn't mean they would suddenly treat him kindly. He also thought that if he kept standing out like this, people might begin to suspect his sudden growth in strength and abilities. So, he decided he would continue testing his luck in the miasma dungeon as before. Determined, he declared to himself that he was done being negative. At last he had earned good money, and from here on he was going to move forward. Reg now had money for equipment and food, and first he decided to take a look at the tool shop. While browsing, a bag caught his attention, and he thought he might grab something to eat as well. The next day, Rude returned to the miasma dungeon. This time he was able to kill the rats with ease. He thought to himself that yesterday he would have been running away from just 5 of them, but now he could defeat them so effortlessly. Rudd activated his Analyze ability and checked the miasma rat's status. He realized this was the ability he had gained from eating that strange monster, and it could even be used on corpses. The rats were level 9, which made him wonder how much his own status had increased. Since defeating them was so easy, he estimated he might be around level 20. When he opened his status, however, Rude was shocked. His level had jumped to 42 and all of his stats had risen dramatically. Just yesterday he had only been level 7. This kind of growth was extremely rare. He needed to check the new abilities he had acquired. When he opened his inventory, an overwhelming arsenal of skills appeared before him. There were so many that he couldn't even count them all. Excited, Rudd thought back to the broken wall he had fallen through in the dungeon, but it had already been sealed. Since the new dungeon would remain closed for some time, today he planned only a light exploration of the miasma dungeon. Still, seeing so many new abilities made him eager to test them. He wanted to know just how effective they were in the deeper floors, plus he was curious to try the new bag he had bought. He decided he would carefully choose the right monster for his first test. The scene shifted to Rude on the 6th floor, slaughtering monsters as he advanced. Soon he passed the 9th floor, then the 13th. But none of the monsters there were enough for him. He needed to go deeper to find a worthy prey. Eventually, Rude reached the 24th floor where he encountered a creature wielding a massive blade. Using Analyze, he discovered it was a lizardman soldier at level 25, with abilities in one-handed swordsmanship, shield techniques, and miasma resistance. Rude noted that lizardmen usually fought in groups, but this one was alone. If it was just a single soldier, perhaps he could take it on. Drawing his sword, Rude charged forward. The lizardman detected him instantly, and blocked with its arm. "Not bad," Reed muttered, "but I won't miss the next strike." However, before he could continue, the lizardman suddenly turned and fled. Confused, Rude chased after it, wondering why it was running. The chase ended in a dead-end corridor. Rude drew his sword again, declaring that it had no way to escape now. But then, the lizardman's eyes changed. Rudd realized too late, it wasn't the prey. He was, at that moment, 2 more lizardman soldiers appeared behind him. Surrounded, Rudd acknowledged the danger. Even with his current advantage in levels, this was a bad situation. The soldiers attacked in formation, forcing Rudd to focus on taking down at least one. He struck at one soldier, but it blocked his sword. Gritting his teeth, Rudd pressed on. Just as he was about to finish one off, another intercepted with a shield, while a third attacked him from behind. Narrowly dodging, Rudd chuckled nervously. That was close. But how many more of you are there? He realized their coordination was too precise, their ambush far too advanced. Suddenly a sharp sound pierced the air. Looking up, Rudd saw a different lizard man commanding from the rear. Using Analyze, Rudd identified it as a lizardman general level 32 with one-handed swordsmanship, shield techniques, miasma resistance, and command. Rudd grinned. Finally, the leader shows himself. The general roared, and all the soldiers charged at Rudd, activating physical reinforcement. Rudd struck several at once, using one's head as a foothold to leap toward the general. He slashed down with full force, but the attack had no effect. The general countered immediately, swinging at Rudd from close range. With no time to dodge, Rudd activated Iron Body, muttering, "I'm not the only one with tricks up my sleeve." Still confused, he reactivated Analyze. He was sure his attack had landed, but it had done no damage. Strange, it doesn't have any reinforcement or resistance skills, so why didn't my strike work? It was probably another lizard's ability. Rudd started analyzing all the other lizards, but none of them had any suspicious abilities. He said he couldn't see any special skill among them. However, he eventually found a lizard with a huge cut across its chest. One of that lizard's abilities was substitution. Rudd then realized that this was the lizard taking all the damage. He immediately rushed at it, killed it on the spot, and said, "It must be tough being a subordinate who only exists to be substituted. Don't take it personally." The general then began shouting, and all the lizards charged at Rudd. He activated his web manipulation, remarking that their decision to group together actually made things much easier for him. He cast his webs, trapping them all at once. Rudd then approached the general and said that this time it was his victory, before finally cutting off the lizard general's head. After defeating them, Rudd said it was time to eat. He had bought a magical bag with the money he earned from the guild, and now it was finally time to use it. The space inside the bag was magically expanded, and its weight completely vanished when closed. Inside he had placed some cooking utensils and seasonings. He explained that when he first fell into that hidden floor, he was desperate to survive, but he had always wanted to try such things. He began cutting up the lizard meat, frying it in a pan, and wondered how monster meat would taste once cooked and seasoned. With his mouth watering, he took a bite and exclaimed that it was far more delicious than he had expected. Who would have thought monster meat could be this good? He even worried he might get addicted to it. After eating, he gained new skills: one-handed swordsmanship, shield techniques, miasma resistance, and command. Still, he wondered why the meat tasted so good. Could it be because of the magical particles inside monsters? He reflected on how useful the Minotaur's skills, the spider's armor, and the evil eye had been to him. Yet he still had abilities from other monsters he hadn't tested, such as the lightning wolf and the black serpent. On his way to the 21st floor, he encountered some bees and frogs. Using his lightning cloak, he electrocuted them all. Afterward, he commented that the skill was very useful while the monsters themselves specialized in inflicting abnormal statuses, but they had run into the wrong opponent. Now it was time to eat frog and insect meat. He breaded and fried everything, saying the poisonous frogs were so tender that their taste reminded him of mushrooms. It made him crave a beer to go with the meal, though sadly he didn't have one. From this meal he gained new skills: poison, temperature variation, powder scales, paralyzing powder scales, and aerial slash. Suddenly he heard a noise coming from deep within the dungeon. It sounded like a collision, and human voices. Shocked that adventurers had reached this far, he quickly stored his food in the bag and remarked that it was rare to encounter another party in battle. He thought this might be his lucky chance to gather some information. The scene then showed a group fighting against a hooded figure. One of them said that her attack hurt too much and couldn't believe she still had so much mana left. Another replied that the trouble she caused would be worth it. He then pulled back her hood, revealing an elf. He sneered, saying, "Of course, an elf. I wonder how much she'll sell for on the black market." At that moment, Rude appeared and said he had been hoping to meet some friendly adventurers. He added that although he didn't know exactly what was happening, he couldn't just stand by and watch a woman being attacked like that. The man with the scar over his eye demanded to know who Rude was. Smiling, Rude replied that he was just an adventurer. The elf shouted at Rude to get out of there immediately, explaining that these men were adventurer hunters. Rude activated his analysis skill, recalling rumors that all of them were high-level adventurers. However, when he tried to analyze the scarred man, he couldn't see his full status. The only thing visible was his level 65. The others were level 52, 56, and 58. Rude realized they must be using obscurement skills or perhaps magical tools. The scarred man, clearly the leader, ordered his men to capture Rudd. His henchmen rushed forward, moving much faster than Rudd had expected. Even so, Rudd managed to defend himself with his sword. The blonde attacker smirked and said, "Not bad for a low ranker." Rudd mocked the man, saying that he was weak. The man grew angry and began attacking Rudd again. At that moment, Rudd activated his poison ability, spitting venom directly into the man's face. The man fell to the ground, screaming in agony as his face began to corrode. He shouted that Rudd was almost like a monster. The elf thought to herself that this was a reckless way of fighting, something unfitting for an adventurer, but for someone as desperate as him it was the only way to survive. The scarred man realized that Rudd had a unique poison ability and concluded that they couldn't underestimate him. He ordered the three of them to attack Rudd all at once. They charged at him, striking relentlessly. Rudd thought that if he stopped moving for even a single moment, he would be killed. He was caught off guard and was about to receive a kick to the face. However, just as the kick landed, Rudd activated his iron body skill. The blow still sent him flying into a river of miasma. The scarred man noted how tough Rudd was, surprised that his neck hadn't broken from the kick. Another one of the hunters said he would finish Rudd off right there. But suddenly Rudd dove deeper into the poisonous swamp. When one of the men tried to follow, the scarred leader stopped him immediately, warning that it was a poisonous swamp and there was no guarantee he'd come back alive. He was certain Rudd wouldn't be able to withstand the swamp's poison either, so he assumed he would resurface soon. Time passed, and Rudd remained underwater in the poison. He wondered how long they planned to wait for him. After a while he thought, "It's time to fight like an adventurer. I was lucky to fall into this swamp." Not only did it contain the usual miasma, but the poisonous vapors around it would rapidly drain the stamina of the adventurer hunters. The hunters began to grow restless. One of them complained that more than 10 minutes had passed and his head was already starting to ache. Raud thought it was time to end it. He would have liked to drag this fight out a little longer, but if he delayed too much, the elf would suffer even more. She was already badly injured. Finally, Rude emerged from the poisonous swamp. He taunted them, saying the effects of the poison and miasma must have been quite rough for them. The men sighed with relief, saying he had finally given up. though he had already caused them too much trouble. Rode then revealed, smiling, that unfortunately for them, he was immune to abnormal status effects, so he couldn't understand the suffering they were experiencing. The scarred man immediately realized that Rudd had nullification of abnormal statuses. He also realized Rudd had tricked them. He ordered his companions to attack right away. They rushed at Rudd, but the swamp's poison continued to drain their stamina, and the accumulated miasma steadily weakened their stats. One of them struck at Rude from behind, but Rude activated his iron body again. Immediately afterward, he unleashed his lightning cloak, electrocuting the two hunters fighting him. As they screamed, he fried them both until one of them cursed, calling him a bastard. Rude then activated his new ability, Aerial Slash, cutting both of them down at the same time. The scarred man was shocked. Rudd had poison, iron body, lightning cloak, and even aerial slash. He wondered why a human possessed so many monster abilities. Rudd answered coldly that it was none of his concern. The scarred man thought that under normal circumstances, he was far superior to humans in physical combat, but in this miasma-filled swamp he was steadily losing ground. He then activated his agility boost and lunged at Rude, but Rude countered by activating his physical reinforcement, shattering the man's sword with a single strike and cleaving him in half as though it were nothing. Rudd remarked that if not for the abnormal status effects, the scarred man would have been much stronger than him. The scene then shifted to the elf. She thanked Rudd for saving her life, saying she couldn't imagine what would have happened to her without him. Rudd replied that he couldn't just leave her in such a pitiful situation. He noticed that despite her efforts to remain composed, her body was still heavily affected by the miasma. He told her he had done what he could to give her first aid, but setting that aside, he thought it was rare to see an elf in such a remote area. He wondered what circumstances had led her to be hunted by adventurer hunters. Suddenly they heard a loud noise. A massive monster appeared before them. Rudd realized it must be the leader of the moths. Its level was 37, and it possessed many poison-related abilities. He thought to himself that after everything he had faced, this moth wouldn't be able to defeat him or intimidate him just because of its size. The moth then used its wind slash ability, and the attack almost struck the elf. Rudd asked if she was all right, and she replied that she was. Rudd said that she had given him quite a scare, so he thought it was only fair to return the favor. He turned to the giant moth and declared that flying away wouldn't help it escape his reach. He activated his aerial slash and launched it toward the moth, cutting into it multiple times. In response, the moth released its paralyzing scales. Rudd simply smiled, knowing paralysis wouldn't work on him, but then he remembered the elf was still there. Before he could react, she raised her staff and cast a powerful wind spell. Rudd was surprised by the strength of her magic, but he thought to himself, as expected of an elf. After her spell, Rudd finished the moth off with a decisive strike to its head. The elf, catching her breath, asked him if he was immune to poison and paralysis, and also why his abilities seemed to resemble those of monsters. Rudd hesitated, wondering how he could possibly explain it to her, but before she could press him further, her body weakened and she collapsed to her knees. Concerned, Rudd asked if she had been struck by the paralyzing scales, but she shook her head. "No, it's something else," she said weakly. She promised to explain everything once they escaped from the dungeon. The scene shifted. They finally emerged from the dungeon and sat down beneath a tree. The elf sighed with relief, saying she felt much better now that she was outside the labyrinth. Before explaining what had happened to her, she introduced herself. Her name was Alicia and she was a former adventurer. Rudd, shocked, asked if she was the very same Alicia of the Emerald Storms. Laughing softly, she admitted that he already knew her. Rudd exclaimed that of course he did. She had been a member of the most renowned S-rank party in the Kingdom of Ludius, the Azure Trials. Everyone knew that party's name, but as far as he remembered, the Azure Trials had been annihilated. Alicia nodded. "Yes, it's been 5 years. We were defeated by monsters. That day we challenged a creature waiting for us in the depths of an S-rank dungeon, the Abyss Dungeon. In that battle we lost our leader. Another member was forced to retire due to severe injuries, and one was completely devoured by the labyrinth itself. As for me," she trailed off, showing the scar in the center of her chest. Embarrassed, Rudd asked what that was. She explained that it was a curse placed upon her that day, a so-called low-level curse. Rode frowned, saying he had never heard of such a thing. Alicia agreed, saying she had never encountered one either. She had tried every possible method to break it, but the most she could do was slow its progression. She explained that the adventurer hunters had learned of her curse and tried to exploit her condition for profit. In any case, she said quietly, my life will end when my level reaches 0, but even so I couldn't bear the thought of surrendering to those men. Rude thought for a moment, then suggested that perhaps he could help her with the curse. He pulled out his guild card and considered one of his skills, substitution. This ability allowed him to select a target and take their attacks and negative statuses onto himself. He asked her if she would allow him to test something. Though she didn't fully understand what he meant, she eventually agreed. Rudder placed his hand on her shoulder and activated substitution. Alicia gasped as she felt the curse leaving her body, transferring into his. She begged him to stop, warning that he would become cursed instead, but Rudd simply smiled and told her to trust him. In that moment, the curse shifted completely onto Rude. He then activated his unique ability Nullification of Abnormal Statuses, shattering the curse entirely. Staring at his hand, he whispered that it seemed to have worked. Alicia, stunned, struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Rudd told her to check her guild card. When she did, her status had returned to normal. She could hardly believe it. The curse was gone. Rudd explained that this was his unique ability, Nullification of Abnormal Statuses. He had gambled on the idea that he could nullify a curse once he transferred it to himself, and thankfully it had worked. Calling him an idiot, Alicia demanded to know why he would risk so much for her, a complete stranger. But even as she scolded him, she thanked him deeply. Rudd gently comforted her, resting a hand on her shoulder. The scene then shifted to a bar. Alicia was in high spirits, laughing and drinking happily. She said the food there was cheap, and the beer was delicious. She praised Rude for knowing such good places. Embarrassed, he simply gave her a thumbs up, thinking to himself that the place really was nice, at least until they were eventually kicked out. He then asked her if she would be alright drinking so much, especially since only a few hours earlier she had been gravely wounded. Smiling, Alicia said she was ready for another round. Besides, on a day as good as this, why wouldn't I drink? They toasted, and Rudd asked what her plans were now. She replied that first she wanted to get to know him better. With a cute expression, she asked why he had decided to become an adventurer. Rudd explained that long ago his village had been attacked by monsters. Those monsters killed his family and friends and took everything from him. But thanks to an S-rank adventurer, he survived. A flashback showed that adventurer saving young Rude from a group of monsters. Rude said he would never forget that sight, and ever since then he had dreamed of becoming an S-rank adventurer himself, so he could help people in the same way that he declared was his greatest life goal. Alicia smiled and told him it was a noble dream. Rudd asked if she wouldn't laugh at him, but she shook her head. She explained that she too had once dreamed of reaching SAC rank and becoming stronger and stronger, at least until she was cursed. She also believed some of her comrades were still trapped in the depths of the Abyss dungeon. No matter what it took, she was determined to face that monster again. But for now, she said, we both need to grow stronger to reach our goals. She then asked Rude if he would like to form a party with her. Rude was taken aback by the sudden proposal. Before he could respond, the same men who had mocked him before appeared, grabbing Alicia by the arm. They sneered that Rude was drinking with a beautiful woman and once again called him the carrion of miasma. Rude recognized them immediately. They told Alicia to stop drinking with garbage like him and invited her to drink with them instead. Rudd stood up, demanding they release her immediately, which only made them angrier. But before things escalated, Alicia ordered them to stop. She reminded them they were in a tavern, and if they wanted to fight, there was another way to settle it. The scene cut to the three of them sitting at a table, drinks lined up. Alicia declared, whoever drinks the most wins. And so, the contest began. As they drank heavily, the entire tavern cheered them on. Before long, the two men collapsed unconscious, while Alicia remained steady and victorious. Rudd gave her another thumbs up. Rudd told her she had done well, especially since she had already been drunk before the contest, but swaying, Ilya drunkenly insisted, You're my savior. I haven't fallen so low that I'd just sit by and watch while my savior is mocked. Yet before she could finish, she passed out in Rud's lap. With a sigh, Rud said he had no choice. He activated his substitution skill, transferring her drunkenness onto himself. Alicia quickly woke up, surprised. Rud explained that he had taken her intoxication since he couldn't get drunk anyway. Laughing in amazement, she said, "First you took my curse, and now my drunkenness. Your ability is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. More than ever, I want to form a party with you." Of course, she didn't stop drinking. In fact, the first thing she did after waking up was order another round. She soon walked up to a sign advertising the tavern's special dish and said it was a shame she couldn't try it. The tavern owner explained that the fishing grounds of Barnabas had been overrun by monsters. He had already sent requests to the guild, but all the high-level adventurers were currently away. He asked Rud and Alicia if they would accept the request instead. The scene shifted to Barnabas's fishing grounds. Rud and Alicia were on a boat. She pointed out that this was the Barnabas's fishing field, and declared that they would defeat the monsters quickly so they could enjoy the tavern's special dish. But suddenly, one of the monsters attacked from beneath the water. Rud smiled, saying, "Finally, they've shown up. This must be the monster the owner mentioned." Alicia, however, urged him to look more carefully. From a bird's-eye view, they saw dozens of monsters surrounding their boat. Rud activated his analysis ability and identified them as level 23 creatures. Their skills included high-speed swimming, water bullets, and sniping. The monsters began firing water bullets at Rud. He realized he couldn't dodge such attacks in the limited space of the boat. So, Rud jumped into the water, immediately drawing the attention of all the fish-like monsters, which rushed at him. Smiling, he activated his lightning cloak, electrocuting them all in an instant. Alicia was astonished at how quickly he had dealt with them, but Rud, still wary, said there was more to come. Then he began to wonder why weren't the remaining monsters attacking him. Rud wondered if the monsters were being cautious, or perhaps trying to protect something. He told Alicia that he would dive to the bottom to investigate and asked her for a favor. Tying a rope around his waist, Rud descended into the depths of the sea. Once underwater, he quickly realized the truth. The monsters weren't attacking him, but neither were they fleeing. That could only mean they were protecting something. And then he saw it, a massive creature lurking on the ocean floor. Using analysis, Rud discovered it was level 38. Its abilities included paralysis poison, autonomy poison resistance, and accelerated regeneration. Rud noted that the creature, called a nemono, was enormous, but it didn't resemble a sea anemone at all. Instead, it looked more like a hermit crab. Suddenly, a monster fish emerged from one of its tentacles, and Rud realized that was how it was spawning the smaller fish. If he didn't defeat the boss itself, killing its minions would be pointless. Since the Nemona wasn't attacking yet, Rud decided to prepare himself first, but at that moment the fish swarmed his legs and began dragging him down. He realized the reason they hadn't attacked before was to distract him from the tentacles. Activating his lightning cloak, Rud electrocuted all the monsters around him. "Now then," Rud thought aloud, "how about you, big guy?" As long as he maintained contact, even such a massive body should be electrocuted. But then he noticed something strange. The tentacles were no longer attached to the crab. That's when he remembered the Nemona had the autonomy skill. It had severed its own limbs the moment the lightning struck. The giant crab lunged at Rud. By now he had been underwater for too long and was running out of breath. He tugged on the rope, trusting Alicia to pull him back. With her wind magic, she hauled him to the surface. Alicia asked if he was all right, and Rud thanked her for saving his life. He explained that a boss was down there continuously producing the fish. It also possessed accelerated regeneration, so he needed to defeat it quickly. Alicia warned that monsters had a huge advantage underwater, and her magic couldn't reach them effectively. She asked if Rud had a plan. "There's only one way," he said. He thought back to how she had revealed her curse and her desire to form a party with him. For that reason, before she could decide, he felt he needed to reveal his own secret. Picking up one of the dead fish, he told her not to tell anyone what she was about to see. The scene shifted. Rud was back underwater. This time, he had a new ability, high-speed swimming. Cutting through the water with incredible speed, he slaughtered the monster fish in his path. The boss sent its tentacles after him again, but this time Rude easily dodged and closed the distance. With a powerful strike of his blade, he pierced the hermit crab, activating his lightning cloak once more. The electricity surged through the beast, finishing it for good. Rudd thought to himself that now the fishing grounds should return to peace, but then his mind turned to Alicia. What was she thinking after seeing him devour monsters? What would she say when he returned? When Rude surfaced, Alicia was gone. He smiled bitterly, wondering why he had expected her to wait for him. I guess I was too hopeful this time, he thought. But then suddenly a voice called out, "You took too long." Turning, he saw Alicia holding some sticks. She said she was glad to see he wasn't hurt, and asked if he had defeated the boss. Rude nodded, and she thanked God. She explained that she couldn't just sit and do nothing while he was fighting, so she had gathered wood to make a fire. It would help dry his clothes. Surprised, Reed asked if she was really all right after seeing what he had done. She admitted that at first she had been shocked, but the fact that he had trusted her enough to reveal his secret made her happier than anything else. Grateful, Rudy thanked her for staying. He confessed he had wanted to obtain the boss's abilities as well, so he had cut off a piece of it and brought it back, but eating it in front of her felt awkward. Instead, he had also caught some normal fish for her. He told her he had even grabbed one of the Barnama's fish for her, though it might feel strange to eat next to a monster corpse. Alicia didn't care in the slightest. Excited, she said she would absolutely eat it. As the sun set, Rode smiled and told her that while they ate, he would share the story of the very first time he had eaten a monster. Later that night, Alicia was eating happily. Between bites, she laughed and said the meal was delicious. Alicia was surprised that Rude ate monsters and asked if that was the reason he had eaten his first one. Rude answered that it was thanks to that habit that a weakling hanker like him was able to take a step closer to his dream. Alicia smiled and said she finally understood. He had used that power to save her from the adventurer hunters, and from her curse. And when cooked like this, even monsters looked rather delicious. Rode had prepared jerneb fillets and sautéed tentacle miso. Smiling, he said that monsters were surprisingly tasty. He admitted that he didn't really need to eat jernebs anymore, but he cooked them anyway and asked if Alicia wanted to try some. She refused, saying she couldn't be sure she would survive the side effects, so she would pass this time. However, she asked him once more if he would join her party. Red grew serious, asking if she didn't have more powerful acquaintances she could count on. She explained that it had already been 5 years since she was cursed. Even if she hadn't died in that labyrinth, considering the lifespan of humans, many of her former comrades had likely already retired. And besides, most frontline adventurers were a little unhinged. No matter how powerful they were, she couldn't trust her back to them. What she wanted was someone she could adventure with, someone she could entrust her back to without hesitation. And if it was Rudd, she believed she could do that. Rudd smiled and agreed to form a party with her. The scene then shifted to the Adventurers Guild in the Bologna division. Alicia was full of energy, excited about preparing for their first quest together. Rude doubted they would be able to get a good job since one of them was a hankier. Alicia admitted he was right but said she already knew what she wanted. They approached the receptionist where Alicia announced they were forming a party starting today, and asked if they could be registered. When the receptionist saw Alicia's adventurer card, she was shocked to learn that Alicia was an S-rank adventurer, the famous Emerald Storm Alicia. Her unique ability was spirit magic, not to mention the countless other abilities she possessed. The receptionist, still stunned, asked why someone like her would form a party with the miasma butcher. At that, Alicia's expression darkened, and the woman quickly corrected herself, embarrassed, saying she understood. Alicia then said she also wanted Rudd's rank to be raised and asked what requirements he still lacked. The receptionist checked some papers and explained that Rudd already had enough achievements. The only thing missing were combat accomplishments. Alicia then requested the hardest subjugation mission available so they could complete it together. The receptionist agreed, saying that at that very moment, there was a mission to exterminate a pack of gray wolves. The scene shifted to the outskirts of Bologna. Rude was already moving stealthily among the wolves, picking them off one by one, but then one of the wolves howled, summoning reinforcements. Rude told Alicia that the newcomers were all hers. She nodded, summoned her spirit, and called forth Sylphid. She asked the spirit to lend her its power and Rude was stunned. That was her unique ability, spirit magic. With a single command, she unleashed a razor-wind gale that tore through the wolves in front of her, slicing some clean in half. Rude thought to himself that her power was overwhelming. Dodging something like that would be impossible. Alicia commented that her strength was still being hindered by her curse, and Rude thought he couldn't even imagine what her full power might be like. Just then, several wolves ambushed Rude from behind. He realized there were still far more of them hidden, and he wouldn't be able to block the attack in time. At the last moment, Alicia called out to Sylphid. In an instant, Rude vanished from the wolves' reach. Looking up, the wolves saw the two of them hovering in the air. Rude was overjoyed. "You can even do this," he exclaimed, thanking Alicia for saving his life again, but she told him that if he wanted to thank someone, he should thank the little spirit. Still, she warned, they couldn't let their guard down. She had spotted about 5 more wolves hiding in the bushes, and likely many more nearby. Rudd said that it was his turn now, and activated his echolocation. He announced that there were about 30 wolves in total, and with the ones they had already defeated, they could finish the mission in one strike. He asked Alicia to focus her attack on the spot he would indicate. He thought to himself that echolocation lost accuracy in open areas, and even Alicia couldn't aim at multiple targets at once, but if they attacked in a circle they could herd the gray wolves into one place. Alicia nodded and said, "All right," she had already done her part, so the rest was up to Rude. Rudon appeared in the middle of the wolves with glowing red eyes, and activated his paralysis breath, causing all the wolves to collapse to the ground. The scene shifted, and it was nearly nightfall. By then he had killed a total of 52 wolves. Alicia said she couldn't believe they had encountered so many in just one day. Replied that perhaps their numbers really were